Welcome to Histrology, where history meets royalty.
Fog rolls over the River Thames, heavy and pale as though London itself is trying to hide its sins. In the heart of Whitehall Palace, behind doors gilded with gold and guarded by silence, a queen wrestles with her conscience. It is the winter of 1561, and Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen, stands before her mirror, not as England's ruler, but as a woman burdened with a secret no crown could protect. Her fingers trace the pearls around her neck, each one a reminder of purity, of the image she must maintain. Yet her reflection trembles, because in her heart purity was long lost. Unease, guilt, a heartbeat echoing louder than the ticking clock. The whispers had begun months ago. The court spoke of Robert Dudley, the man who could make the Queen of England forget she was a queen at all. His presence was intoxicating, confidence wrapped in charm, danger hidden in devotion. He was married, of course, to Amy Robsart, but in Elizabeth's court, vows were currency, not barriers. They met in candlelight, their laughter masked by the rustle of silk and the creak of palace floors. And somewhere between diplomacy and desire, a forbidden bond grew, one that would soon demand a price neither of them could afford. Outside the royal chambers, the kingdom buzzed with rumors. Courtiers noticed Elizabeth's long absences, her sudden fainting spells, her unusual silence. Her ladies-in-waiting, loyal yet frightened, dared not speak, but their eyes told stories no one dared write. One of them, Lady Catherine Ashley, the Queen's governess since childhood, watched with both sorrow and fear. She knew the danger. A queen could be many things, wise, cruel, even ruthless. But a mother in secret? That could destroy a dynasty. Tension rising. Footsteps echoing down cold marble halls. In a hidden chamber beneath the old palace chapel, the truth began to take shape. Elizabeth, pale and trembling, leaned against the stone wall as Catherine wrapped her in blankets. The midwife, an older woman sworn to secrecy under threat of death, knelt beside her. "No one must know," Elizabeth whispered, clutching Catherine's hand so tightly it left marks. Her voice cracked, half from pain, half from terror. "If they find out, they'll call me unfit to rule. They'll call me..." Catherine pressed her hand to the Queen's lips. "Shh, Your Majesty. You are England. No one must ever know." Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, a cry echoed. Small, fragile, human. The sound that could unravel an empire. Shock. Relief. Then dread. Heavy silence follows the first cry. The child, a boy, was born under the shadow of dawn. He had Elizabeth's red gold hair and eyes that seemed to shift between blue and storm gray. A Tudor child, and a curse. Elizabeth looked at him, her tears glistening in the dim candlelight. "He must never know who I am," she said, almost choking on her words. "Swear it, Catherine. Swear it on your life." Catherine nodded, tears of her own running down her face. The midwife, her hands shaking, wrapped the child and took him away into the dark. By sunrise, there was no trace he had ever existed. Weeks later, tragedy struck. Amy Robsart, Robert Dudley's wife, was found dead at the bottom of a staircase, her neck broken, her body sprawled on cold stone. The court exploded in whispers. Was it murder? A fall? A sacrifice? Elizabeth locked herself in her chambers for 3 days. When she emerged, her face was pale, but her eyes burned with something colder than grief. From that day forward, she wore the mask that history would remember. The Virgin Queen, untouchable, unbroken. But behind that mask, the ghost of a child followed her every step. Years passed. England flourished under her reign. Poets praised her, soldiers died for her, and nations trembled before her. But at night, when the torches burned low, she would hear it again. The echo of a newborn's cry carried through the corridors of memory. Only Catherine Ashley knew the truth. And even she began to fear what it meant. The boy had been hidden away under a false name, Arthur Dudley, raised in quiet countryside. His origins erased by royal command. But secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have roots that claw their way back to the surface. In 1587, a young man appeared in Spain, educated, fluent in languages, and carrying a pendant marked with the Tudor rose. He called himself Arthur Dudley, and when questioned, he spoke of a life half remembered, of guards, of golden halls, of a woman whose face he could never forget. The Spanish court took interest. Could it be true? Could England's Virgin Queen have lied to the world? If the story were proven, it could shatter her reign, destroy her legacy, and divide her kingdom. Shock, tension, realization, the secret that could end an empire is awakening. Far away in London, Elizabeth, now older and wearier, stood by her window as rain streaked down the glass. A messenger from Spain had arrived bearing news. He spoke carefully, afraid to meet her gaze. "Your Majesty," he said, "the Spaniards claim to have found a man who calls himself your son." Elizabeth didn't speak for a long time. Then, with an expression colder than steel, she whispered, "There are no sons of Elizabeth Tudor." Her hands trembled, but only slightly. Because even now she could feel it, the truth, bleeding through the cracks of history. Slow breath. Realization, silence. The world would never know what really happened that winter in 1561. The official records remained clean. The Virgin Queen stayed untouchable. But those who had seen her in her weakest hour, those who had heard the infant cry in the chapel cellar, carried the truth to their graves. And centuries later, when historians found the Spanish accounts of Arthur Dudley, the whispers returned. Was it legend? Was it fact? Or was it the last great secret of the Tudor crown, hidden in the heartbeat of a mother who could never be one? The sea roared against the Spanish coast, gray and violent under a sky bruised with storm. From the deck of a creaking English ship, a young man watched the horizon blur between water and smoke. His name, at least the one he carried now, was Arthur Dudley, though even he did not know what that truly meant. He had grown up with whispers instead of lullabies, with questions instead of love. His father, a quiet nobleman from Kent, had always treated him with an odd mixture of affection and fear, as though Arthur was both gift and curse. Whenever he asked about his mother, the man's hands would tremble, and the conversation would die. And then, one night, when the man lay dying, he pulled Arthur close and whispered words that would haunt him forever. "You are no common son. Your blood belongs to the crown, and your mother is England herself." Those words carved themselves into Arthur's mind, and so he ran, across borders, across oceans, chasing a truth that felt both sacred and damned. Spain, 1587. In the heart of the Escorial Palace, the royal ministers gathered around a table draped in crimson velvet. Candles flickered, their light trembling over maps of England and lists of spies. The Spanish Inquisition, ever watchful, had brought them a prize unlike any other. A young Englishman claiming to be the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth. "He speaks Latin like a scholar," said one official. "And French with a courtly tongue," added another. "He bears a pendant with the Tudor rose," said the third, holding up the small token as if it were made of fire. At the far end of the table, King Philip II of Spain leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes calculating. He had fought Elizabeth for decades, through faith, through war, through silence. Now, perhaps, God himself had delivered her greatest weakness to him. "Bring the boy to me," he said quietly. "Let us see what truth his blood holds." The interrogation chamber was cold and heavy with incense. Arthur stood before the king, no crown on his head, no certainty in his heart. But he carried himself with a strange, quiet dignity, a sense that somehow this room full of power did not frighten him. "You claim to be born of Elizabeth Tudor," Philip began. "Explain yourself." Arthur bowed his head slightly. "I claim nothing, Your Majesty. I only speak of what I remember, fragments of a life that does not belong to me." He described dreams of golden halls, of a woman with flame-red hair singing softly in a language he did not know. He spoke of being taken away in the dark, of being raised under false names, of tutors who refused to tell him who paid them. The king listened in silence. Every word was weighed, every gesture measured. When Arthur finished, Philip stood. "If what you say is true," he said, "then the Virgin Queen is no virgin at all. Her throne stands on deceit, and England itself is a lie." The room fell silent. In that moment, Arthur realized what his claim meant. Not glory, not identity, but war. That night, he was locked in a small cell, candle flickering beside a stone crucifix. Sleep came in flashes, faces, whispers, a child's cry. And in his dreams she came to him again, the woman with red gold hair, her face soft but sad. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling through the mist. "Forgive me." He reached for her, but she vanished into the dark, leaving only the scent of rosewater and the faint echo of a heartbeat. When he woke, tears burned his eyes. He did not know if she was a ghost or a memory, but he knew now she was real. Meanwhile, across the sea, the English court buzzed like a disturbed hive. Rumors of a false prince in Spain had reached William Cecil, Lord Burghley, the Queen's most trusted minister. His thin hands trembled as he read the intercepted letter. A man calling himself Arthur Dudley, said to bear resemblance to Her Majesty, has been taken by the Spanish king. Burghley felt the blood drain from his face. He knew that name. He had seen it once, long ago, written in ink that was quickly burned. Without hesitation, he went to the Queen. Elizabeth sat in her private chamber, writing letters under the glow of a single candle. Her face was older now, her eyes sharp, lined with power and pain. When Burghley entered, she looked up, not as a monarch, but as someone who already knew what he would say. "It's true then," she whispered before he could speak. "He's alive." Burghley bowed his head. "The Spaniards have him, Your Majesty. They mean to use him against you." Elizabeth turned away, staring into the fire. Her silence stretched, brittle and endless. Finally, she spoke, her voice no longer regal but weary. "I told you once, William, there are no sons of Elizabeth Tudor. And yet, Your Majesty, enough." She snapped, her eyes flashing. "If this boy speaks of me, then he speaks treason. Let him vanish as he should have years ago." Her words were cold. But when Burghley left, she stayed by the fire long after the candles died. her hand trembling against her chest. Because deep down, beneath the armor of a queen, she could still feel it. The ache of a mother who had buried her own heart to save a crown. In Spain, the game turned darker. Arthur was questioned again, this time by the Holy Inquisition. They demanded proof, names, confessions. They called him a liar, a heretic, a spy. But Arthur did not break. He spoke calmly, saying only, "I seek no throne, no power, only truth." And then, in the silence that followed, he said something that froze the room. "Tell your king, I have her eyes." The news spread through Europe like wildfire. Whispers filled taverns and embassies alike. The Queen's secret son, held by her enemies. In London, the rumors reached even the servants and street poets. But none dared speak it aloud where walls could hear. Within the palace, Elizabeth ordered every trace of the story destroyed. Letters burned, witnesses silenced, travelers questioned. The Virgin Queen's image had to remain untouched, yet every night, she dreamed of a child she had never been allowed to hold. And in the morning, she woke to the smell of roses, though no roses were ever in her chamber. One evening, as the court celebrated the victory over the Spanish Armada, Elizabeth withdrew to her private chapel. The music outside was loud, but in the chapel, silence reigned. She knelt before the altar, her hands clasped tight. "If he lives," she whispered to the empty air, "let him never know what I did. Let him hate me, but live free of the curse of the crown." The candle flickered, and for a moment she thought she heard a faint voice behind her. "He already knows, Mother." She turned, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Only the shifting light and the echo of her own sins. Back in Spain, Arthur's fate turned uncertain. Some said he was sent to a monastery under guard. Others claimed he vanished one stormy night, his cell door open, the guards asleep. No body was ever found, and yet, years later, travelers in France and Italy spoke of a man with English features and royal bearing, living under another name. A man who avoided mirrors, who kept a single pendant with a faded Tudor rose. They said he was kind, but distant. That sometimes he would stare at the sea for hours and whisper, "The crown was never mine." But its shadow was. In England, Elizabeth ruled for many more years, loved by her people, feared by her enemies. But those close to her said that as she aged, her laughter grew rarer, her eyes more hollow. On her deathbed, when her attendants asked if she had any last words, she murmured something so faint only one maid heard it. "My boy, forgive me." The maid never repeated those words aloud. But after the Queen's death, she placed a small silver rose on her coffin, one that had never belonged to the royal collection. History remembers Elizabeth as the Virgin Queen, the woman who married her country and gave birth to an empire. But in the shadows of her legend, another story lingers, of a forbidden child, a mother's grief, and a secret that changed nothing yet meant everything. Perhaps Arthur Dudley was a pretender. Perhaps he was truth itself, erased by those who feared it. Only the sea between England and Spain knows for certain, and it keeps its secrets well. The year was 1603. England's air hung heavy with mourning. Bells tolled across London, echoing through the fog-choked streets as if the city itself wept. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, was dead. Her reign, long, golden, unbroken, had come to an end. But in death, as in life, she refused to rest peacefully. Because behind the veil of national grief, a quiet terror spread. What truths had died with her? At Richmond Palace, servants moved like ghosts through deserted halls. Tapestries were covered, mirrors draped in black cloth, as if the walls themselves must not see what came next. Among the Queen's belongings, her ladies-in-waiting discovered a locked oak chest, small, carved with the Tudor rose, sealed with melted wax. No one had seen it before. No record mentioned it, and yet, inside that chest lay a secret that would rewrite the meaning of her legacy. The key was found sewn into the hem of her private robe. When the royal archivist, Sir Francis Millington, broke the seal, the air seemed to shift, cold, charged, watchful. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, each written in Elizabeth's unmistakable hand, delicate yet firm, bearing the faint scent of rose water and wax. Some were addressed to names erased by time. Others bore no recipient at all, only a single letter at the top of each. A. Millington read the first by candlelight. My beloved child, you will never know the warmth of my hand, nor the weight of your name. I am a prisoner of my crown, and you, my sweetest sin. When I look upon the stars, I wonder if you see them too, though you do not know why they make you weep. He stopped. His hands trembled. For years he had served a queen worshipped as divine, above weakness, above desire. And yet here, in her own words, was a confession not meant for history. He turned to the next page. They have taken you far, beyond the reach of court and tongue. I watch the river and think of you, my Arthur, named not for your father, but for the dream of a just king. Arthur. That name again. The same whispered in Spanish corridors years ago. The same that had vanished in smoke and rumor. Millington leaned back, his pulse hammering in his ears. The Queen of England, the Virgin Queen, had written to a son. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he kept reading, letter after letter, tracing the invisible thread of a secret love. Elizabeth spoke of him, Robert Dudley, not by name, but by fragments of feeling. He was my mirror, my madness, my undoing. And yet, if sin had a face, it was mercy beside the loneliness of rule. I see your father's eyes in you, though I have never seen your face. How cruel that love and duty are enemies clothed in the same gold. Each word felt like the heartbeat of a woman trapped between the throne and her own humanity. Each letter bled the truth that England had been too proud to believe, and the last one was sealed differently. A crimson mark, her personal wax seal, cracked now with age. Millington hesitated. Then with trembling fingers he broke it open. If these words are ever read, then I am dust, and England is no longer mine. But know this, my child lives. I gave him to a man I trusted, to raise him far from the shadow of my name. He is my last truth, and should Spain or France ever claim him, remember his blood carries England's flame. The letter was dated 1574, exactly 9 months after Elizabeth's mysterious illness that had forced her into seclusion for weeks. Millington froze. He realized what he held wasn't mere scandal, it was dynamite. The line of succession, the legacy of an empire, the myth of the Virgin Queen, all of it rested on a lie that could destroy everything. He knew what had to be done. He sealed the letters again, wrapped them in cloth, and took them to Robert Cecil, the new power behind the throne, the son of William Cecil, Elizabeth's old advisor. Cecil read them in silence. When he was done, He looked at Millington with eyes colder than stone. "You will never speak of this again," he said. "Not to your wife, not to your children, not even to God. Do you understand?" Millington hesitated. "But my lord, the truth—" "The truth?" Cecil's voice cut like a knife. "England cannot afford truth, not now. Not ever." That night, the letters vanished from the royal archives. Officially, they never existed. But a copy, a single copy, was made before they disappeared into fire. Millington hid it in a monastery near Kent under a false inscription, Epistles of St. Agnes. Years passed. The world forgot. King James now ruled England, and the memory of Elizabeth became legend, sculpted into perfection, stripped of her sins. But truth has a strange way of surviving, even when buried. In 1622, a young scholar named Thomas Layton stumbled upon a sealed bundle while cataloging old monastic papers. The parchment was aged, the ink faded, but one phrase stood out beneath layers of dust. "My beloved Arthur." Layton, intrigued, began translating the letters. The more he read, the more impossible it seemed. The confessions of a queen, her love, her secret child, her agony. He knew the risk. Such knowledge could be considered treason, even witchcraft. But curiosity was stronger than fear. He wrote to a friend in France, saying, "I have found what the Virgin Queen tried to hide, a heart that was never virgin at all." Weeks later, his home burned to the ground. His manuscripts were seized, and Thomas Layton was never seen again. The letters vanished once more, this time into the hands of silence. Some say they were taken by secret agents of the crown. Others believe the Vatican acquired them, storing them deep within forbidden archives labeled Anglica Heretica. But one fragment, one single parchment, survived in the private collection of a noblewoman named Lady Anne Haversham. It bore only one line, scorched and incomplete, but it was enough to haunt her for life. "He will return to the sea from which he came, carrying my name unspoken." Lady Haversham believed it referred to Arthur Dudley, the lost son. She spent years searching for any trace, ship records, burial registers, foreign whispers, and then, in a small Spanish port, she found something extraordinary. A sailor's logbook dated 1608 described a dying Englishman rescued from a wreck off the coast of Bilbao. He spoke little, only fragments in broken Spanish. "Tell the Queen, I forgive her." He was buried there without name, beneath a stone marked only with a single rose. Centuries later, historians dismissed the entire affair as myth, a tale of royal scandal exaggerated by time. But every so often letters surface, scraps of parchment, faded ink, fragments of handwriting that match Elizabeth's. One in particular, found in 1892, reads, "I have sinned against my crown, but not my heart. My heart belongs to the one England must never know." No historian could verify it, yet none dared deny it either. Some say Elizabeth's spirit still haunts Richmond Palace, not as the proud queen who ruled a golden age, but as a mother searching for her child. Visitors have claimed to see her ghost walking the long gallery, her hand resting on the air as if holding something unseen. And sometimes when the candles burn low, a faint scent of roses drifts through the empty halls, the same scent that lingered on her letters. History remembers her as the Virgin Queen. But perhaps that was the cruelest irony of all. For beneath the crown of gold and jewels was a woman who had loved once, deeply and dangerously, and who paid for that love with her soul. The legend of Arthur Dudley remains unproven. No grave bears his name, no portrait bears his face, but in the quiet spaces between history's lies and truths, his ghost still breathes. He is the shadow England was never meant to see, the son of power and secrecy, the child of a queen who was never allowed to be a mother, and perhaps that is why, even after 4 centuries, her spirit cannot rest, because some secrets are too heavy for the grave to keep. The year was 1658. England was no longer ruled by a queen, nor by divine right, but by the cold hand of men and war. The echoes of monarchy had faded into the dust of revolution. Yet in the quiet corners of ruined abbeys and forgotten libraries, whispers still clung like ivy to stone. The Virgin Queen had borne a child. Most dismissed it as treasonous gossip, a myth for the disillusioned. But to Father Ambrose Hale, a scholar priest with more curiosity than faith, it was something else. A riddle that had haunted him since boyhood. Father Hale had grown up near Kent, not far from the ruins of the old monastery where Sir Francis Millington had once hidden the letters of Elizabeth II. Villagers told strange tales of that place, that on stormy nights, one could hear the sound of pages turning, though no one was there, and once, a candle burning in the window when the wind itself seemed dead. For most, it was superstition. For Ambrose, it was a calling. He arrived there one winter's evening, a lantern in hand, its flame trembling against the cold rain. The monastery stood like a broken ribcage against the night sky, its walls crumbling, its altar cracked. Beneath the choir floor, he found a narrow passage sealed by debris. With each step downward, the air grew heavier, thick with age, dust, and something else. Memory. At the end of the passage lay a small vault, and within it a wooden reliquary, carved with the Tudor rose, the same emblem that had once sealed Elizabeth's secret letters. He opened it with a rusted key found among the rubble. Inside, wrapped in linen, was a small silver vial and a scrap of parchment. The parchment was written in trembling script, almost illegible. This is all that remains of him. Arthur, son of no one, heir to everything. May God forgive the blood that bound him. And below, a faint signature. F.M. Father Hale's breath caught. Francis Millington, the royal archivist who had discovered Elizabeth's letters. If this was his hand, then the vial might contain... No, it couldn't be. But curiosity burned stronger than reason. He lifted the vial to the light. Inside, a few dark drops, preserved in oil. Blood. He had found the last trace of Arthur Dudley, or so he believed. That night, Hale could not sleep. He laid the vial upon his table and stared at it, the flame of his candle dancing in its reflection. Something about it drew him, as if the blood itself pulsed faintly, remembering. And then, as the clock struck midnight, he heard it. A soft voice, not spoken aloud but inside his mind. Whispering, faint, ancient, sorrowful. "Do not open what was sealed by love and sin." He froze. The sound faded. He tried to pray, but no words came. In the days that followed, Father Hale became consumed. He began writing frantically, connecting fragments of Tudor lore. Elizabeth's mysterious illness in 1574. Robert Dudley's secret absence that same year. The rumors of an English child raised in Spain. One entry from his journal reads, "If the Queen's son lived, then his bloodline may yet live also." What if the throne we fought to destroy still beats within another's veins? He decided to test the blood. With the help of an alchemist, a recluse named Elias Corwin, he performed an ancient rite, not of science, but of superstition. The two men mixed the blood with sacred oil and burned it upon the altar. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the flame turned blue. The church bells outside rang on their own, and the wind began to whisper a name. Arthur! Corwin collapsed. Hale stood paralyzed, watching as the blue fire twisted into the faint image of a woman's face, pale, regal, crowned with sorrow. It was her, Elizabeth. Her lips moved silently, forming words he could not hear. Then the flame extinguished. Darkness fell. When morning came, Father Hale found Corwin dead. His hands were marked with a strange symbol. A circle of thorns burned into the flesh. And upon the table, where the vial had been, lay only a single rose petal. That same day, Hale fled Kent and took refuge in London, carrying with him the parchment marked Arthur. He hid it within the library of St. Bartholomew's, where he served as a curate under an assumed name, but whispers followed him. Doors creaked open at night. Footsteps echoed in corridors when he was alone. And once a voice in the dark said softly, "The air is not gone. The blood remembers." Driven half mad by fear, Hale began researching all known records of Arthur Dudley. To his shock, he found a Spanish manuscript written by a Jesuit chronicler, Fray Miguel de Rojas, describing an Englishman who had appeared in Madrid claiming to be the son of the late queen. The Spanish court, suspicious, interrogated him. He refused to reveal his true name, only saying, "My mother wore a crown she never wanted. I wear the shadow she left me." The manuscript ended abruptly, noting that the man had vanished one night during a storm at sea. But in the margin, a later hand had added, "He had a mark on his shoulder, the Tudor rose." Hale began to wonder, if Arthur truly lived in Spain, could he have had children? Could the bloodline have continued, hidden through centuries in silence? He traced the name de Rojas forward, finding descendants in Spain and Italy. One in particular, Isabella de Rojas y Tudor, caught his attention. Her family crest bore the same rose entwined with thorns. When Hale wrote to her, she replied with a letter that chilled him to the bone. "Our family has always known of a woman in white who watches over us. She comes when a child is born and when one dies. We call her La Reina del Silencio, the Queen of Silence." Attached to her letter was a small painted medallion depicting a crowned woman with tear-filled eyes and a single rose in her hand. It was Elizabeth. By 1660, Father Hale had become a recluse, haunted and frail. He spoke rarely, except to warn his students, blood is the truest ghost of all. And then, one winter night, he vanished. His room was found locked from within. Only his journal remained open to a final entry. "I have seen him, the heir, not in flesh but in the mirror of dreams. His eyes are hers, his fate the same. England will know peace only when its queen's secret is forgiven." No one ever found the vial again. No one ever proved his claims. But in a remote Spanish village centuries later, a family grave bears an odd inscription. "Arthur's blood sleeps, but does not die." Modern historians dismiss these tales as fantasy, the ravings of men lost in obsession. But a few researchers at Cambridge quietly admit that Hale's original manuscripts, now locked in private archives, describe locations that do exist. The vault beneath the Kent Monastery, the rose-marked reliquary, the inscriptions on a Spanish tomb. And so, the mystery lives on. Was Arthur Dudley truly Elizabeth's forbidden son? Did his bloodline survive, hidden, watching, waiting? Or was it all a curse, the echo of a queen's guilt haunting generations long after her death? No one can say for sure, but sometimes when night falls over London, and the Thames reflects the moon like a blade, a figure in white is said to walk along the old palace walls, her face veiled, her hand clutching a rose that never withers. And if you listen closely, through the wind and the tolling of distant bells, you might still hear her voice whispering through centuries of silence. "Arthur, my son, forgive me. They said time buries all secrets, but time does not bury blood. It only hides it, deep within bones, graves, and the quiet places where memory refuses to die." Centuries passed since the death of Elizabeth I. Her reign became legend, her virginity an emblem, her loneliness a myth. No one dared to speak again of the child she may have carried. History had done its duty. It erased the shame, polished the crown, and left the truth to rot in silence until the winter of 1889. In that year, a young historian named Dr. Alaric Wren arrived in Kent, determined to study the lesser-known archives of the Tudor age. He was not driven by fame or fortune. He was haunted by a single phrase he had found in an old Jesuit journal stored in Madrid. "The heir sleeps in England, guarded by the Queen's own ghost." It was nonsense to most scholars. But Alaric had grown up near the same monastery where Father Ambrose Hale once lived, though no one remembered Hale's name anymore. Only children whispered about the priest who heard the dead speak. The monastery ruins were worse than legend described. Vines clung to the stones like veins, and the floor was a mosaic of broken angels. Yet among the debris, Alaric found a strange thing. A hollow in the altar, sealed with lead, bearing the faint engraving of a rose with thorns. He pried it open carefully. Inside was a small tin box. Within that, wrapped in linen darkened by centuries, lay a parchment written in Latin, and a single glass fragment, once part of a vial. The parchment read, "Here lies the memory of Arthur, the unloved son. His truth shall one day rise again when the blood remembers its name." It was signed with the initials, A.H. Ambrose Hale. Alaric trembled. He had studied every known Tudor document, every record of Elizabeth's private life. Now, in his hands, was the first physical trace of a legend that scholars had dismissed for 300 years. But what truly stunned him was what he found beneath the parchment. A faint smear of dried, reddish-brown residue, centuries-old blood. He didn't know it yet, but he was holding the same relic that Hale had once guarded. At the time, forensic science was still young, but blood analysis, in its earliest form, was being explored in London. Alaric brought the fragment to a biologist named Dr. Lucian Hargrave, who had access to the royal collections for comparative research. When Lucian heard the story, he laughed. "You're chasing ghosts, Wren. The Virgin Queen had no child," but he agreed to humor him. The two men examined the residue under crude chemical tests, and what they discovered shook them both. The blood contained a rare protein marker identical to that found in a preserved lock of Elizabeth's hair, stored in Westminster archives. It was a primitive result, far from proof, but it was enough to raise questions neither man could answer. Was it coincidence? Contamination? Or was it the whisper of something history tried to bury? Word spread quietly through academic circles. And then, the silence began. Within weeks, Hargrave withdrew from the project. He burned his notes, claiming political pressure from those who preferred the past remain untampered. Alaric received anonymous letters warning him to stop chasing the ghost of the Queen, but he couldn't stop. The deeper he dug, the more the past pulled him in. Through the archives of the Spanish Jesuits, Alaric discovered the de Rojas manuscript, the same account Father Hale once found. But this version had a missing page restored. And on that page, he found a name written in faint ink. Arthur's child, Isabella, a name that matched the same woman Hale had once written to. If true, that meant the bloodline had continued, hidden, unacknowledged, stretching silently into Europe. Alaric traced the genealogy, connecting distant branches: Isabella de Rojas y Tudor, Lorenzo de Rojas, Ana Corbin, and finally, a living descendant in 1889, Lady Eleanor Corbin, residing in Oxfordshire. Lady Eleanor was no ordinary noblewoman. She was quiet, widowed young, and rumored to have the Queen's eyes, pale gray, intense, unyielding. When Alaric requested an interview, she refused. But days later, she summoned him privately to her manor. The meeting was unlike anything he'd imagined. The manor was filled with relics, Tudor portraits, manuscripts, and a single locket on the mantel bearing the Tudor rose entwined with Spanish lilies. When Alaric asked where she had found it, she smiled faintly. "It has been in my family since before we were allowed to speak our name. My grandmother used to say we were descended from a queen who loved too deeply to be remembered." He showed her the parchment he'd found. Her hands trembled as she read the words. Then, without another word, she led him into her private chapel. There, behind the altar, she revealed a sealed stone compartment. Inside lay a coffin, no larger than a child's. "This," she said softly, "is where it began. My family calls him the Lost Prince, but we were told never to open it." That night, as the manor slept, Alaric could not resist. He returned to the chapel with a lantern. He pried open the small tomb. Inside, wrapped in ancient silk, lay the bones of an infant, perfectly preserved, untouched by time. Upon its chest rested a gold medallion engraved with the Tudor rose. The inscription read, "For Arthur's blood, born of silence, bound by sin." The candlelight flickered, and for a moment the air itself seemed to breathe. The shadows on the wall formed the outline of a woman in royal attire, standing over the coffin. Her lips moved soundlessly. Alaric dropped his lantern and fled. The next morning, the manor was silent. Lady Eleanor was found dead in her chair, her eyes wide open, staring toward the chapel. Alaric vanished without trace. The only thing left behind was his journal, recovered years later from an antiquarian's shop in London. In its final entry, written in a hurried, uneven hand, he confessed, "The bloodline is real. The Queen's child lived, and so did his descendants. But they are cursed, each marked by her sorrow. Her spirit guards them, punishes them, loves them still. I have seen her." The journal ends with one final line: "History lied. Blood does not." In 1936, during the restoration of that same Kent monastery, workers uncovered a sealed vault. Inside were human remains buried beside a Tudor medallion identical to the one found in Lady Eleanor's chapel. But this one bore two words newly engraved: "Forgiven." At last, No one ever determined who added the inscription or when, but the timing was strange. Exactly 333 years after Elizabeth I's death. Today, historians dismiss these stories as Gothic folklore, too romantic, too dark to be real. But a few